If you're thinking about entering the logistics industry, there's something that we absolutely have to talk about: the non-compete. Brian, tell me what your thoughts are about the non-compete.
Well, first off, the non-compete is an agreement usually set forth by the employer. It prevents you, if you start with that company, it prevents you from working at a competitor or working against them in some fashion. Usually these agreements are 6 months, 12 months, 2 years. It just depends on that type of agreement.
So I'm assuming that you had one at some point.
Yeah, I mean... Yeah, so I think, with our non-compete, it's one of those things that it's tricky, right? You sign it on day one, with the employer, and you don't really know what you're signing at the time, right? But one thing that we want to, share with the audience is the fact that you have to ask questions. You have to make sure that, you're reading through it or getting somebody else to take a look at it, maybe an attorney, maybe somebody, with legal counsel. A lot of times in those agreements, even down the road, after a couple of years of working for the company, it's taboo to go and ask about it, right? So if you do ask about it, it automatically raises red flags, and you might get a meeting with upper management or, whatever that looks like. So, the best thing I can say is on that front end, you have to ask questions.
Completely agree. And that's just something that, for our listeners, if you've listened to previous episodes, you're well aware that Brian and I spent a number of years at TQL, great company, second largest in the industry. But there's a bit of a white elephant that goes undiscussed when joining a company like TQL. The thing is, it's a hot topic today. A lot of companies are going away.
Yeah.
I know they're going through government trying to abolish all non-competes, especially in the logistics industry. So do your homework. If this is something that you truly want to pursue, talk to current employees, talk to past employees, talk to leadership. Get some advice and insight into the details of the non-compete. Brian, I want to ask you about something else.
Yeah, what you got?
Have you heard of the golden handcuffs?
A couple times, yeah. I might have experienced them once or twice, but yeah.
Tell us a little bit about that.
Yeah, so I think this is the golden handcuffs are, an area that you get into a company or you get into a situation in work where you might be making a little bit too much money or be making significant money, but you're not really happy, you're not fulfilled. It's an area that, you can't leave your job. Maybe it's for a non-compete, maybe it's for, the golden handcuffs specifically refer to the money that you're making, right? So if you're making good enough money, you stick it out and you don't leave because, you might have 2 kids at home with a wife and a mortgage and 2 car payments, right? So that's something that, is, I think is the number one indicator for all golden handcuffs.
Yeah, and I think it makes it difficult as well because, with a non-compete, you're making good money, but what accountability is there for the employer to then have to, make sure they're building a culture where the employees feel invested in, they feel respected, they feel valued? Because at the end of the day, there's a non-compete. So how likely is an employee going to be to, whether it's 1 year, 2 year, you and I had 2-year non-competes,
Yep.
Bit of a sore subject, but we're past that now.
Yeah.
But there's no real accountability from a culture standpoint or leadership standpoint to make sure that they're continuing to build a culture and invest in their employees so that they feel fulfilled and they want to come into work each day. What are your thoughts on that?
Yeah. Do you see that as like they put the non-compete on there for like a security blanket, right? Or what do you think?
Not necessarily, because I do think there is some benefit in a non-compete.
Yeah.
Logistics specifically, you can't go give an employee, invest in them the training, give them the industry knowledge, just the sales training, the data. That stuff's very sensitive. Mm-hmm. And if they're coming into a company, they have the transparency into clients, to load volume. If you're outside the industry, this is just sensitive information on, what drives the company.
Sure.
If you don't have a non-compete in place, they can just hop ship the next day, start their own company or join a smaller brokerage and go after all those companies. Yeah. So there is benefit in a non-compete, but on the flip side, if you're doing the right things, your employees shouldn't want to leave.
Yeah.
So a lot of companies do have a non-solicit. In fact, we have a non-solicit just to protect our company. But we're making sure that we are coming in every single day, making sure our employees are taken care of and they feel valued in, so that they're not entertaining those conversations.
Yeah. How do you feel like, obviously we had the 2-year non-compete, both of us did. How did you handle the mental side of things? How did you, you couldn't compete in logistics or trucking for 24 months, man. How did you handle that mentally?
Yeah, in full transparency, again, I know Brian and I have mentioned this here and there, but Brian and I started this conversation about Veritas Logistics back in 2013. I won't go into all the details, but we had this idea that we could do something better. Not the same size. We didn't want to be a multi-billion-dollar company, but in terms of culture and people and making sure that we're building a company where people felt welcome and valued. We knew that we could do something better, but that didn't manifest until 5 years later. and 5 years later, we had our different paths. We left roughly around the same time. But those 2 years after I left, the first week, the honeymoon, where it's like, oh, I'm relieved.
Sure.
That lasted a week.
Yeah.
Those 2 years were probably the darkest years of my entire life.
Yeah.
And I mean that. I mean, it was a struggle. I mean, I had to go back and I was, visiting doctors, having panic attacks, severe anxiety, depression, hell, you can tell your story too, but like I was getting offers from companies for a fraction of what I was making.
Not even close.
I was going back to entry level. So now it's like, what am I doing? Did I make the wrong decision?
Yeah.
And you have the rocks in your life, you being one of them, my wife being another, some of my family that understood like, oh, he's going to be fine. But at the time, it's like, I am in the dumps. Like, I am never making it out of this hole.
Yeah.
Luckily, we did.
Right.
And I climbed out of that, but it was a very difficult time. If I didn't have the support and network around me, I don't know if we'd be in these seats today. But I mean, what are your thoughts? How'd you handle it? How'd it go for you?
No, it's a great, man. I think I've had a lot of hardships in my life, right? Like rough upbringing. I think those 2 years, right? It was just like an incongruence of I was living like kind of like a double life, right?
Yep.
Where I was incongruent with who I wanted to be 2 years from then, right? So I think it was like I was going into a different job that was fine. It challenged me on a different level, but like I knew the end goal.
Yep.
And I wasn't doing the day-to-day tasks to get me to that end goal. And so it was like, that's the best way I can describe it, was so mentally challenging, with it being so incongruent with what I really wanted, right?
Let me back up real quick, Brian.
Yeah.
So you couldn't do the tasks, the small tasks to get you to your goal. Tell me more about that, because you didn't jump ship to another company.
Sure.
But why couldn't you do anything in between the 2 years?
You mean from like a non-compete perspective?
Yeah.
Yeah. So I mean, that's part of the non-compete, right? Is you can't compete in the industry. You can't do those other things. You can't make phone calls to prospective shippers or clients or
start an LLC
or start an LLC, right? So I mean, I think those are some of the things. Like, there's a lot of thought ideation during those times. There's a lot of stuff written down on paper, But I think those are the things that you had to grapple with, especially when, what the future looks like, or that there's a light at the end of the tunnel.
Yeah. Was there a turning point for you, as you got towards the end of the 2 years?
Yeah.
Was there a turning point where you kind of found that fire again? Because from my own experience, I mean, you had to check me at one point, but there's a level of just like complacency that set in, and it took me a minute to snap out of that. Was there any turning point for you where you're like, oh, like let's go? Yeah,
I think it was. It was tough. I will tell you this: at that other job, it was tough the first 12, 18 months because I was still learning a different industry, and I didn't have much success, right? And then I started to build up some momentum and some success at the other company, and it was like, okay, like how am I going to transition this? I'm starting to have success at this 2-year company. We'll call it that. And I think there wasn't like a definitive turning point for me, but there was a time like, okay, like this isn't going to be forever. I need to go ahead and like transition these accounts or transition these deals to somebody else so I can get that ball rolling with the logistics company.
Yeah, for sure. So let me ask you this. What type of advice would you give someone that is currently in a similar role? they have a non-compete, whether it's 1 year, 6 months, 2 years, whatever it may be. What advice would you give them if they're looking to take that leap of faith and pursue their passion?
The first thing, like number one, it's go back to the document you signed, right? Like just make sure.
It might be important. It might be pretty important.
Pretty important, right? So I think the first part is, signing the document or whatever you're signing on day 1 or day 2 or day 10 or whatever that is. Get some additional information from an attorney around that. The second thing, if you're, for us, it's taboo to ask, right? And I know that other people that work at different companies, if you are 4 or 5 years in and you ask to see the non-compete, I mentioned it earlier, but that's taboo to talk about. So I would ask an attorney. I would ask somebody in corporate litigation to see if they fought any type of lawsuits against this company, what that looks like. That's what I would do, is go to those attorneys, see what they think. They're in this space every single day. But yeah, that would be it. Justin, if you're going into this, and there might be a non-compete, what would your plan be?
So if I'm already tied to a non-compete and I don't feel necessarily comfortable speaking to my direct supervisor for obvious reasons, I may go to HR or find an outside mentor or a professional that can take a look at my document. But for me, if this is something I'm set on, I'm going to have a plan. I'm not jumping into the deep end with sharks with no plan, which is what I actually did. But I actually did go to HR. I started to set up some interviews. Yeah. So my plan, the way I love to do things, I love learning the hard way. So my purpose with all this is to help someone not have to learn the hard way. But I went on some interviews. I was trying to set up a plan. At the time, I was in Austin, Texas. I had a kid, a wife, a house, my second child on the way. I was trying to move back to Cincinnati, which is where we are now, which is where our company is. Yeah. But I was setting up interviews to come back to Cincinnati. Unfortunately, I told them why I took the PTO, and it was for a job interview. And that was my last day. So I had a house full and a family to move to Cincinnati with zero plan. Yeah. But my point is, have a plan. Talk to people, find a mentor, external, internal, it doesn't matter. Friend, family, professionals. Have a plan set in place with actionable items that you can check off. If the first one's talk to HR, second one is interview, line up a job. If you're relocating, that's a little bit of a different challenge, but have a plan going into it. That way, when you do have that conversation and you resign or you get fired, like I did, you have a plan, and there's not as much stress and anxiety that comes with a huge life change, like a career change.
Yeah, no, it's great information. I think even for me in my scenario, I felt like this was a rude awakening, right? And it made me eat some humble pie. And I think when I quit, right, like during that time, I thought I was going to get a million job opportunities. I'm a high performing salesperson. I've led some teams, and I was just going to get, job after job offer after job offer, 100K plus, 150 plus. Like, that did not happen, right? So and we share pretty much everything, but like that did not happen, right? So I think a lot of it, I love the part about having a plan, because I think it's essential, man. I think you have to have that. Because if you don't, you'll find yourself in a scenario where, you're getting you mentioned this a little bit earlier, but like entry level job opportunities, and you're saying, oh shit, what do I do now? Right. So love it, man. I love the plan part. It's crucial. Another thing to mention on, that having that plan is making sure that you're networking. That's an area that I felt like I didn't do a good enough job of, right? I kept my head down in the sand. I was, getting after it, 6-7 years in a row. I didn't network. We have a ton of tools today: LinkedIn, Instagram, social media, even within your personal network at home. Use those networks to look at job opportunities, or use those networks to learn more, or what other companies are paying, or what other companies are doing. I think that's extremely valuable, because if I had to do it again, I probably wouldn't do it that way. I would make sure that I networked more on LinkedIn, had a job opportunity lined up, or maybe a couple of them, before, we finally cut ties or took that leap of faith. So
You and I both. No, I appreciate you sharing that.
Yeah.
If you're listening and have any questions, please DM Brian or myself. If we have time, we'd be more than happy to get back to you and help you out in any way possible.
Yeah.
At the end of the day, I think most providers view this industry as getting something from point A to point B.
Yeah.
It's a lot more than that.
Yeah.
And I think when you can do these things that we're discussing consistently and you're putting your client's best interests in the forefront,
Yeah.
the rest handles itself.